An apple, a raven, and a writing desk. The story of Ever After High. Chapter 3. The First Day. As Princess Applewhite was yelling at a scared-looking dwarf behind a desk, her friends, Princess Ashlyn Charming and Briar Beauty, were trying and failing at calming her when the dwarf turned and looked shockingly at the doorway, and so did the princesses. In the doorway, there was Raven Queen with the short blue-haired girl. The room was silent, and the blue-haired girl said something, but no one was really listening. Apple turned back to the dwarf, this time in tears. "Please, please, I can't room with her," Apple cried. "Room with her?" Raven thought. "I'm rooming with Maddie." "Get Holly, she can tell you," continued Apple. "I'm sorry, Princess Apple, but Princess Holly has already checked in and is rooming with her sister," explained the dwarf. Apple screamed so loud that it seemed to have shook the entire room. "But I can't room with her," screamed Apple. "Excuse me, but," Raven started to say, but was almost immediately stopped. "You don't speak," Apple commanded. "Excuse me? Who do you think you are?" yelled Raven. The entire room gasped. At this point, Hunter Huntsman walked into the doorway and looked at Ashlyn. "Who is that?" Briar whispered. "No one," answered Ashlyn, who turned white. Apple and Raven continued to fight. "She's going to try to kill me," Apple said to the dwarf. "Kill you?" said Raven. "Who even are you?" Apple looked Raven up and down, then dead in the eye. "I'm Princess Applewhite," she announced. Of course. Only a royal could be so rude," scoffed Raven. All the royals in the room glared at Raven, and the non-royals laughed. "Don't play dumb. This is your plan, isn't it? To be roommates, then kill me in my sleep," yelled Apple. "What? Room with you?" Raven laughed. "I'm rooming with Maddie, right?" she asked, looking at the dwarf. "Well," started the dwarf, "some rooms were changed to—" "We know," interrupted Apple. "You know what? This is pointless. I'm going to see the headmaster," Apple said before storming off. The now shaking dwarf handed Maddie her room key and room number. "Well, then who am I rooming with?" Maddie said with a frown. "Kitty Cheshire," answered the dwarf. "Yay!" Maddie yelled, throwing her arms in the air. "Come on, Raven, we can have tea with Kitty while she talks to the headmaster," said Maddie, pulling Raven towards the dorms before she could say anything else. "Well, this should be interesting," Briar said to Ashlyn, who was staring at the boy in the doorway. "Geez, he's dirty. Must be a non-royal," said Briar, also staring at him now with a look of disgust. "Come on, let's go see our new roomie," she laughs. "What?" said Ashlyn, snapping back into focus as the boy moved towards the desk. "Come on," Briar laughs, leading Ashlyn towards the dorms. While Apple went to see the headmaster, Maddie set up tea for herself, Raven, and Kitty in their dorm room. "Well, Raven, quite an impression you made," said Kitty while chuckling to herself. "Such chaos, and the first day hasn't even started." "Hush, Kitty. Don't mind her. She loves to cause trouble," Maddie interrupted, handing Kitty a cup of tea. "What can I say? Chaos makes this kitty purr," said Kitty, purring with a smirk before disappearing, then reappearing on the branch of a large tree Kitty slept in that was growing in their room. "She's right," Raven sighed. "I can't believe I thought everything would be okay. When they look at me, all they see is my mom." Maddie was playing with the small dormouse that lived in her hat, but when she heard what Raven said, she jumped up in excitement. "I have an idea," she yelled. "That doesn't happen very often," Kitty said seriously before chuckling again. Maddie ignored her and continued. "We just need to show them how normal Raven is. Then," Kitty interrupted her. "You're going to make someone normal," she laughed. "You're not even normal." "No, I think Maddie's onto something," said Raven. "Really? What?" replied Maddie. Raven shook her head and smiled at Maddie, then continued Maddie's thought for her. "We'll go to class and join clubs, and then they'll see I'm nothing like my mother." "Operation Make Raven Princessier," yelled Maddie. "Or Princesses, or Princessurist, or, tea," she yelled, realizing there was a cup of tea still in front of her. "What do you think, Kitty?" Raven asked, trying not to laugh at her friend. No," Kitty answered sharply. "I like who I am, Raven. You should learn to as well. And I'm glad I'm not one of those royals." Raven looked shocked, but what she was saying kind of made sense. "I'll be whatever the opposite of a royal is," Kitty continued. "A rebel." a rebel, Raven thought to herself, before being pulled out of her thoughts by Maddie. Royals and rebels, Maddie repeated, creating a song. Raven laughed, then hugged her friend. Sometimes I really think you are mad, Maddie. Oh, she is, added Kitty. The girls continued with tea while Apple met with Headmaster Grimm in his office. Applewhite, Headmaster Grimm said. Headmaster Milton Grimm was toweringly tall and heavier set. As if he weren't intimidating enough, his voice was deep and stern. He was a bit older than Apple's parents, and really had no patience for people, especially children, despite the fact that he worked with teenagers. Headmaster Grimm, Apple started. Cookie, he asked, interrupting her. What? No, the door for the front desk of the dorms, said, Apple yelled. I know, Grimm said, interrupting her again, that you're rooming with Raven Queen. You know? But Raven Queen, Apple started again, only to be interrupted by Grimm again. The Grand Royal Courts would like the school to help students, he paused with a strange look on his face, adapt to this new school environment. His face changed as if he had a bad taste in his mouth. What does that have to do with who I room with? Questioned Apple. I felt that if your fellow students saw you and... He paused again. Her, he said, choking on the word. Getting along, that they would follow your example. But Headmaster Grimm, Apple protested. Headmaster Grimm shot Apple a cold look, and she stopped. I assure you, Miss White, I am less than thrilled with the presence of our new students, but this is what's best for everyone, he said in a stern voice. I know you'll do as you're told, he added with a glare. Yes, sir, Apple answered in a defeated tone before turning and leaving the headmaster alone in his office. While the princesses were at the front desk, the royal guards had already unpacked everything and left. The room had high ceilings, 2 full vanities, and 2 king-size canopy beds. It's perfect, cried Ashlyn. Oh, how I've missed this place, Briar added before diving into the bed designed with pink and purple roses. Ashlyn sat down on the bed across from Briar that was light blue and gold and laced with crystals. How do you think Apple's doing? Ashlyn said worryingly. She's Applewhite. Once she explains to Grimm, he'll probably give her her own room, assured Briar. Come on, let's go meet Daring and Ben. Before she could answer, Ashlyn's phone rang. Someone's popular today, Briar jokes. It's just from Darling. We were going to meet for coffee, said Ashlyn, quickly covering the screen. Even on the ride here, you didn't put it down, added Briar. That was Darling then, too. Daring was driving her crazy this morning, explains Ashlyn nervously. Whatever, said Briar, shrugging it off. I'll see you at Grimm's first day speech, then. Yes, of course, Ashlyn said with a sigh of relief. Both the girls exit the room in opposite directions, and Ashlyn responds to the message and smiles to herself with excitement. The south wing of the dorms was where most of the rebels were staying, and a large group of them had gathered in the dorm's common area to talk about what had just taken place. I haven't even met her yet, but I like her already, exclaimed Sparrowhood. Shh, keep your voice down, said Cedarhood, who is not related to Sparrow. She's in Kitty's room. How could you say that? She's the Evil Queen's daughter. Aren't you scared? Cedarwood whispered. What? She was awesome, standing up to the royals like that, Sparrow said, defending himself. Shh, Cedar yelled, pointing at Kitty's door. Sparrow ignored Cedar's warning and turned to Hunter, who was on his phone and not paying attention to his new friends. Care to join us, Hunter? Sparrow said, waving his hand in front of Hunter's face. Oh yeah, sorry. I agree with him, Hunter said, flustered. I have to go, but I'll meet up with you guys at Grimm's speech. Before anyone could object, Hunter stood up and rushed out of the room. See, he agrees. That girl is awesome, Sparrow yelled, pointing at Kitty's door. At that exact moment, Raven opened the door. Sparrow froze in embarrassment, and Cedar and Cerise couldn't help but laugh. Sorry, but your face was priceless, laughed Cerise. I did warn you. I'm Cedar, and this is Sparrow and Cerise, she said, wiping the tears from her wooden cheeks. Raven, but I guess you knew that. Sorry, said Sparrow sheepishly. No problem. At least I made someone's day, Raven said, laughing. Maddie and Kitty followed Raven out of their room. Maddie froze and stared at Cedar intently for an uncomfortable amount of time. Hello, Cedar said, confused. You're Pinocchio's daughter, exclaimed Maddie. Obviously, added Kitty. She's wooden. How hat-tastic. Can you make your nose grow, pretty please, with a hat on top, begged Maddie. No, that's only my dad, explained Cedar. So can you lie, asked Raven, sitting down with the group. Nope, I can't lie at all, said Cedar, but someday I will, and no one will see it coming, she added excitedly. Right, the daughter of Pinocchio is going to lie one day. Sure, scoffed Kitty, rolling her eyes. Yeah, the same day the Cheshire Cat's daughter is nice and optimistic, said Raven. The group erupted with laughter. Raven looked around at her new group of friends and felt good about being at Ever After for the first time since Hatter told her she was going. Maybe this year will be different. As Raven was thinking about the year to come, the laughter and jokes turned to silence as Apple entered the room. As Ashlyn was making her way out of the building, Princess Duchess Swan leapt from nowhere, it seemed, and began to dance circles around Ashlyn. Ashlyn Charming, sweetheart of Ever After, Duchess said mockingly. Hi, Duchess, Ashlyn replied sheepishly. Where are you running off to on the first day? Very unprincess-like, scoffed Duchess. To Storybrooke End, explained Ashlyn, who looked very uncomfortable. On the first day? What's so important? Said Duchess, twirling in front of Ashlyn. None of your business, answered Darling, walking out of the building. Duchess looked shocked at Darling, then angry as she turned back to Ashlyn before finally putting on a smile. Nice catching up with you, Ash, said Duchess in a high voice, trying to sound extra nice, then danced her way down the steps of the building before turning back to Ashlyn. Oh, and Ash, she continued, a little birdie told me you're good with animals. She gave Ashlyn an evil smile, then danced away. Ashlyn froze in fear of what Duchess had just said and what she might mean. She's always trying to knock you down, ever since the first day last year, said Darling, walking towards her sister. Ashlyn did not respond, and continued drowning in her thoughts. What's in Storybrooke End? Darling said, nudging her sister. Nothing, answered Ashlyn, shaking her head. I'm going for a walk. Want company? Asked Darling, smiling. No, thank you, Ashlyn said sharply. But we're still on for lunch, she continued, before heading towards the east gates that led to the enchanted forest. Okay then, Darling said, confused, but quickly shrugged it off and went to find her brothers. As Darling turned around, Duchess leapt out of nowhere once again and stared at Ashlyn as she walked into the forest. Back in the common areas of the dorm, Apple stood in the hallway that connected the south and north wings. Can I speak with you? Apple said, smiling at Raven. Raven was put off by Apple's smile. Sure, answered Raven cautiously. Raven got up and followed Apple to the dorm that they would share. Before they walked in, Raven turned and looked at Maddie, who was giving her a thumbs up, along with the dormouse that lived in her hat. Raven walked fully into the room. Surprise, Apple yelled. What? Replied Raven. Well, Headmaster Grimm thinks that if we get along, our friends will too. So, Apple said, with another huge smile gesturing towards the room. Apple's half of the room looked like a small castle with red and white colored everything, pearls, and a full-length vanity with a talking mirror. Raven's half, which Apple had decorated, was dark, and everything was black. The window was even colored, so no light could shine through. The carpet, the vanity, even the chair that sat in the corner, everything was all black velvet. Raven was in disbelief of what she was looking at. Not to mention the fact that she had to share a room with Apple. The perfect room for a dark witch, Apple said excitedly. What? Shouted Raven, being pulled out of her thoughts by what Apple had just said. I'm not a witch, and this isn't perfect. It's black, she yelled. Completely black. Apple sighed. I was trying to make this work, she said, sitting down, defeated on her bed. Raven gathered herself and realized what Apple was trying to do. She walked over to the window and pulled the curtain down, letting light into her side of the room. The light from the window revealed that the bed actually wasn't black, but dark purple that had small black gems reflecting light. It's beautiful, Raven said, fixated on the bed. Apple hops up in excitement. Isn't it beautiful? She exclaimed. It is, agreed Raven. The two girls looked at each other fully for the first time. Both of their faces changed, with Raven realizing Apple didn't look mean. She was just angry about not being able to share a room with her friend, just like Raven was. And Apple realized that Raven didn't look evil or scary like her mother had. A wave of guilt fell over the girls as they both realized how poorly they'd acted for really no reason at all. Finally breaking the silence, Apple's phone rang with a text message from Briar. As Apple went to answer her phone, Raven sat on her new bed and immediately sunk into it. The bed was softer than anything she had ever slept in, and was twice as big as her bed at home. In fact, if it hadn't been for Apple calling her name, she would have fallen asleep. My friend Briar and some others are going to meet in the lounge to hang out before the first day starts. She paused before continuing on sheepishly. Do you and your friends want to join us? She asked. Raven was shocked by the invitation and immediately thought it was a bad idea for all of them to hang out. But then she realized that they all went to school together now and would have to be in the same room eventually. Sounds excellent, replied Raven optimistically. Apple was shocked that Raven said yes, but then smiled at her new roommate with excitement. Awesome, exclaimed Apple, bouncing towards the door. Maybe if Apple wasn't so bad, then the rest of the Royals wouldn't be either, Raven thought while typing a message to Maddie in her phone. She told Maddie what happened and what the plan was now, before leaving her new room and following Apple through the castle-like corridors of the school, towards the student lounge in the third building where most of the classrooms were. Hunter walked towards the enchanted forest, bow in hand and a full quiver of arrows on his back. The northeast, he kept repeating to himself. Crystal Lake. 10 minutes, he said in his mind. Once through the gates and off ever after school grounds, he rushed off the path and began dipping and jumping through the trees and shrubs, occasionally picking a center of a tree as a target, then hitting it dead on with an arrow. After a few minutes of running, a voice caught his ear. He stopped in his tracks and looked around to hear where the voice was coming from. Through the trees of the forest, Hunter saw a young princess sitting gracefully on a blanket surrounded by food next to a lake. As if the forest weren't beautiful enough, Hunter thought, gazing at the princess. Summer break was fine, thanks for asking. And how was it here? The princess asked a squirrel that was sitting on her lap. The squirrel squeaked back at her. I'm glad to hear, but I really can't talk long. I'm waiting for someone, said the princess. Hunter fixed his hair and checked his breath before stepping out from behind the trees. Hunter, the princess yelled, running into his arms. Hunter picked her up, and they embraced lovingly for a long time before letting go. Ashlyn, Hunter said, looking deep into her eyes. I missed you. I missed you too, replied Ashlyn with a smile. Before they could say anything else, the squirrel that had been sitting on Ashlyn's lap ran up Hunter's leg and torso before sitting on his shoulder and squeaking loudly. Hello, Pesky, Hunter said through his teeth. Pesky squealed at Hunter, and Ashlyn translated. Look who's back, Ashlyn said for Pesky. Yeah, replied Hunter, rolling his eyes, then placed Pesky down on a tree branch next to him before turning back to Ashlyn. It's been forever, he said, picking her up again. I know, but now we have the whole year together, added Ashlyn. Hunter put her down, and the two kissed before walking over to the meatless, dairy-free picnic Ashlyn had laid out. They sat down close to each other, laughing and talking the rest of the morning, forgetting about the world around them and completely captivated with each other's presence. After finishing their picnic, Ashlyn laid her head on Hunter's chest, and the couple laid peacefully together. Ashlyn closed her eyes and relaxed. She felt like herself with him, like she wasn't Princess Ashlyn Charming, future queen, or the gem of Ever After, who could do no wrong. She felt like Ashlyn, who loved hiking and was obsessed with shoes. I wish we could stay here forever, she said. Me too, sighed Hunter. They both remembered the rules and responsibilities they had waiting for them back at Ever After. Ashlyn longed for things to be different, but a royal and a rebel couldn't be together, she thought. We should get going for Headmaster Grimm's speech, she said. Or we could ditch it and go for a swim, argued Hunter. We can't miss it. It's the first day, replied Ashlyn in shock of the idea, sitting up. Hunter pinned Ashlyn down and sat on top of her. Fine, but you have to promise me a swim, he said, laughing. Hunter, Ashlyn yelled, get off. Promise, demanded Hunter, still sitting on a squirming Ashlyn. Okay, I promise, replied Ashlyn, out of breath from laughing so hard. Good, Hunter said with a smirk. You're impossible, she said, smiling up at him. The two kissed before packing up what was left of their picnic and headed back to the gates of Ever After. While they were leaving, a black and purple swan that had been sitting on the lake watched as the couple left, then smiled deviously to itself. Apple and Raven, along with Maddie, Kitty, Cerise, Cedar, Sparrow, and an out-of-breath Hunter who had just caught up with them, walked through the halls of Ever After as the other students stared at them and whispered to each other. After an awkward walk through the school, the group had reached the student lounge and entered, but the royals inside didn't notice because of the heated discussion going on. "So what was so important that your friends had to wait?" honked Duchess. "Yeah, Ashlyn, where were you?" demanded Daring. Apple's eyes immediately darted to a panicked-looking Ashlyn. "What's going on here?" Apple demanded, running over to Ashlyn. "Yeah, Ash, what is going on?" mocked Duchess. Ashlyn stared down into her lap and didn't answer. She couldn't really answer anyway. "That's enough, Duchess," Apple said, looking at Darling and Dexter for help. "Leave her alone," said Dexter, tripping over his words, trying to sound threatening. "Calm down, boy charming," laughed Duchess. "I think you might want to hear where she's been." "Back off," yelled Darling, standing up to Duchess. Realizing she was outnumbered, Duchess stepped back and danced out of the room. "Fine," she yelled on her way out. Duchess had passed the group of rebels, and the room was suddenly aware of their presence. "What are you doing here?" growled Daring. "Actually," interrupted Apple, "Raven and I are going to room together, and I brought them here so we could all hang out." "Oh, sweet Apple, she's cast a spell on you," cried Daring. "No, Daring, I mean it," replied Apple. "You want us to be friends with them?" asked Briar. "Costs nothing," interrupted Maddie. "What?" said Briar. "Worth everything," continued Maddie, chuckling. "Don't listen to her, she's insane," yelled Daring. "Lasts for a lifetime," Maddie said. "And you're not?" interrupted Raven. "Not one person can own," said Maddie. "You have to be kidding me. Listen to her. None of those Wonderland freaks should even be here," Daring shouted. "Daring," yelled Apple. Kitty appeared at the front of the group. "Well, at least we can listen clearly," yelled Kitty. "And everyone can share," finished Maddie. "What? You're both insane. What are you even talking about?" replied Daring. "Friendship," Kitty shouted. "She's talking about friendship. Maybe you would know that if you royals could see past yourselves for once." Everyone in the room stopped in shock, besides Maddie, who was still chuckling. Before Daring could respond, an announcement came through the speakers around the school. "Attention all students, please proceed to the amphitheater in the Northeast Gardens for Headmaster Grimm's first day speech." The group said nothing else to each other, and separately made their way to the garden, with the defeated Apple and nervous Ashlyn trailing behind. "Are you okay, Apple?" asked Ashlyn. "I just don't know how to get everyone to get along," she sighed. "What about you? Duchess seemed really heated when I walked in." Ashlyn looked over towards where Hunter was walking with Sparrow, then down somberly. "I don't know," she said. The students made their way to the theater and sat down with royals on one side and rebels on the other. Apple sat with Ashlyn and Briar, and could see Holly sitting a few rows in front of her. She realized that if Holly hadn't broken her promise, that everything that happened that morning wouldn't have. Ready and eager to confront Holly, Apple's thoughts were interrupted when Headmaster Grimm tapped on the microphone in front of him to quiet the school. "Welcome, future kings, queens, and advisors of our great kingdoms to Ever After High, where you will learn and study to become great leaders one day just as your parents. You are the future of our kingdoms and the promise of tomorrow. Before your graduation day, I will make sure that each of you are the perfect picture of tradition, grace, and perfection, no matter the challenges that this year may bring. Now all of you, go and soak in the excellence that we have to offer you. And to our newest students, this chance will not be given to you again. Do not waste it." With those words, Grimm turned and exited through the back of the gardens with the rest of the teachers. Almost immediately after, the students all erupted with cheer and excitement for the upcoming year. Each student made their way towards the main hall of the school to go to their lockers before first period. Through the sea of people, Apple was trying to keep up with Holly, who was talking to a girl with purple hair, but eventually lost her. "Was that Holly?" asked Ashlyn. "Yeah, I think so. I wonder who she's rooming with and why she never answered her phone," questioned Briar. "No idea," added Apple. Maddie and Raven were standing at their new lockers looking over their schedules when Sparrow and Hunter walked over in an argument along with Kitty and Cerise. "I'm just saying, why wouldn't you invite me for target practice unless you were scared I'd show you up?" mocked Sparrow. "Scared of someone who spends more time with that thing than he does outside? Yeah, right," yelled Hunter, pointing at the electric guitar Sparrow always carried on his back. Completely ignoring the two boys, Maddie turned to Kitty and Cerise. "So what are your first classes?" "English 201, answered Cerise, and so does Sparrow. "I have Enchanted History of the Kingdoms," said Kitty, "and the Huntsman has Chemistry." "So do I," yelled Maddie, wrapping her arms around Kitty. Kitty smiled, then disappeared before Maddie could fully reach her, and then reappeared behind Cerise, trying to avoid her. I have chemistry as well, Hunter, Raven said, putting her hand on a now pouting Maddie's shoulder. Cool, we can walk together, said Hunter, ignoring Sparrow, who was still arguing with him. Raven got out her new chemistry book from her locker and made arrangements with her new friends to meet in the cafeteria for lunch, then headed down the south hallway where the STEM classes were grouped together with Hunter. Cerise pulled a still arguing Sparrow to the east hall, and Maddie skipped down the west hall, dragging an unhappy Kitty with her. Walking down the south hall with Ashlyn and Briar, Apple saw Holly with the same purple-haired girl from before, and quickened her pace to catch up with them. And then while they were talking, Apple stepped in between them and cornered Holly in the hallway. Where have you been? She demanded. Apple, Holly said in shock, finally remembering her promise to Briar. You were supposed to share a room with Briar, and you never showed up, yelled Apple. I'm so sorry, cried Holly. I was with, she started. I don't care. Do you know who I'm rooming with now? What were you thinking? Continued Apple. I'm so sorry. Poppy is here now, and we spent the whole morning decorating our room together, explained Holly, but was interrupted again. So no one else can have the roommate they want because you wanted to room with your sister? How selfish of you, Holly, Apple screamed. Holly's eyes welled up with tears. Hey, yelled Poppy, stepping in between the two princesses. That's enough, Apple, demanded Ashlyn. Briar took Apple's arm and led her to their first period class, while Ashlyn and Poppy consoled Holly, who was now fully crying. The tables in the chemistry lab had 4 chairs at each of them, and the group you sat with would be your group for the rest of the year. Raven and Hunter sat down at the table farthest away from the teacher's desk. Briar and Apple walked in, and Raven waved at them, relieved that she would know the rest of her group. But Apple didn't see her and sat down at the first table. Apple sat quietly in horror of what she had just done. Briar didn't say anything to her friend, but Apple could feel her disapproval nonetheless. Ashlyn walked in a few moments later, looking obviously troubled. Hunter sat up quickly and gazed at her, wanting so badly to comfort his girlfriend, and Ashlyn wanted nothing more, but they both knew it couldn't happen. Now, even more upset, Ashlyn sat down with her friends and gave Apple a sad look before skimming through the syllabus on her desk. Julian Beanstalk, Harry Hook, and Daring walked into the chemistry lab. Dear sister, you're in my first period. How lucky for you, Daring said, sitting in the empty chair at the first table. So it seems, answered Ashlyn, forcing a smile. Julian and Harry stood in the doorway, not knowing where to sit, when a familiar face waved them over. Hey, Harry, called Hunter. He lives across from Sparrow and I, he said to Raven. Hello, mates, Harry said in an accent so thick Raven couldn't tell where he was from. He was wearing a white button-down shirt that looked like he had torn the sleeves off, blood-red pants, and heavy black eyeliner. His hair was jet black, curly, and so long it almost covered his eyes. Hello, said Jillian. She had hazelnut brown skin, and her hair was light brown with streaks of darker browns, and it was braided to the side. She was wearing a pink shirt with lace flowers and a long green vest that had beautiful green vines embroidered on it, and brown leggings. First day at Ever After. Would you have thought we'd be here? Asked Hunter. Never, scoffed Harry. Well, I'm going to make the most of it, added Julian. I already signed up for competitive climbing. That's a thing, laughed Harry. It is, said Julian, kicking Harry underneath the table. What about you, Raven? Asked Hunter. I don't know, she answered. Good morning, class, yelled Dr. Maurice, running into the room. He stopped to catch his breath, leaning over his desk, panting, then continued. Welcome, class, to your first day. Now let's get started, Dr. Maurice said, putting on goggles that made his eyes look huge. After 4 of her 7 classes, Raven made her way to the cafeteria with Maddie, who hadn't stopped talking about her classes since they started walking. On one side of the cafeteria, Cerise, Cedar, Sparrow, Harry, and Julian sat at a table with light pink lunch trays, filled with french fries, cheese puffs, chicken nuggets, and other fatty, delicious foods. On the other side, Apple sat with Briar, Dexter, Daring, Darling, and Blondie-Locks, who had been talking Briar's ear off about her new post on the school's news site. They all had round porcelain dinner plates with turkey, mashed potatoes, peas, and a slice of pie. The 2 groups chose to ignore each other and eat in peace. Maddie and Raven sat down, Raven with her lunch tray, and Maddie pulled a tower of cookies and tea sandwiches along with a hot cup of tea out of her hat. Unannounced to everyone, Kitty sat in the balcony that looked over the cafeteria, utterly bored with the lack of excitement. Kitty looked at the container of french fries in her hand, then smiled deviously to herself before throwing a few at Briar, Daring, and Blondie. "Hex no you didn't," yelled Briar, pulling a french fry out of her hair and pointing it at Cerise. Then Kitty threw a few more at Maddie and Cerise stood up and looked at Briar with the french fry in her hand, and Cerise picked up a handful of cheese puffs. "It's on," she yelled, throwing the cheese puffs at Briar. Within seconds, everyone was throwing food at each other, and Kitty watched from above before smiling, then disappearing. As a tornado of food ravaged through the cafeteria, Ashlyn and Hunter were in a nearby classroom sharing an intimate moment. The couple embraced each other, like they wished they could have before. "This is harder than I thought it was going to be," sighed Ashlyn, letting go of Hunter. "What do you mean?" questioned Hunter. "I mean that we're lying to our friends, and having the same classes but not being able to talk is harder than I had expected," Ashlyn said, turning away from Hunter. "Hey, Ashlyn," Hunter said, turning her around to face him. "It may be difficult, but this is worth it, okay? I love you. Don't give up so fast." "I didn't mean it like that. I'm not giving up. I love you too," said Ashlyn. "So we're still on for our swim?" asked Hunter. "Of course," said Ashlyn with a smile. They embraced again, but let go after hearing a noise coming from the cafeteria. "You go first," said Hunter. Ashlyn kissed Hunter before rushing out of the room towards the cafeteria. She stopped in the archway of the cafeteria, looking at her friends and classmates violently throwing food at each other. Through the madness of flying food, Ashlyn could see Apple crawling underneath the tables. The princess quickly took cover under the table and made her way towards her friend. "Apple," she yelled, "what's going on?" "I'm not sure. We were just eating lunch," said Apple. "Come on, we have to get to Raven." The princesses together made their way to where Raven was kneeling underneath the table with Maddie, who was rambling gibberish, it seemed. "Raven," yelled Apple. "Apple, what just happened?" Raven yelled back. "Cat in a crow's nest," said Maddie. "What?" asked Ashlyn. "Say it again, Maddie," yelled Raven. "No, we have to figure out how to stop them," demanded Apple. "Flies fry in a crow's nest," Maddie screamed before giggling uncontrollably. "Wait, Apple, I think she's saying something," argued Ashlyn. "Cat flies fries," insisted Maddie. "I think she's right," agreed Raven. "But she's not making any sense," yelled Apple. "Cat flies fries in a crow's nest," repeated Ashlyn. "Kitty," exclaimed Raven, "I know what happened." Before she could share with Apple, a booming voice rang throughout the cafeteria. "Enough," bellowed Headmaster Grimm. The students froze in horror. "Not even a day," he said through his teeth. "You seven, come with me now," he yelled so loudly that Maddie jumped, hitting her head on the table, which dragged her out of the state of madness she had been in. "What about them?" argued Cerise, pointing at Briar and her friends. "Enough, Miss Hood. Now," Grimm yelled. Cedar, Cerise, Sparrow, Harry, and Jillian walked towards the archway sheepishly. "And you two, let's go," added Grimm, pointing at Raven and Maddie under the table. The four girls all stood up from underneath the table, and Raven whispered something to Ashlyn before following the rest of her friends out of the cafeteria towards the headmaster's office. Ashlyn stood frozen for a second, unsure of what to do with the information Raven had given her. "Good riddance," huffed Daring. "What?" asked Ashlyn, walking over to her friends, trying to dodge food on the floor. "Where were you?" asked Darling, stepping out from behind a trash can. "You promised we would have lunch together." "You're right, I'm so sorry. I had some first day questions from Mr. Nimble, but I was on my way when I heard yelling," said Ashlyn. "Don't worry, I completely understand. Who could study with those animals running around?" cried Daring. "Sorry, but what were you saying before, Daring?" interrupted Apple. "You heard Headmaster Grimm this morning. This is your only chance," Daring mocked. "But they didn't start it," screamed Ashlyn. "He can't expel them." "Is that what Raven said?" Apple asked. "Yes, and if we tell Grimm it wasn't their fault, he can't expel them," exclaimed Ashlyn. "We didn't start it," yelled Briar, crossing her arms. "I know, but they didn't throw the food first," Ashlyn argued. "Who did, Ash?" Apple questioned. "Not important," Ashlyn said sheepishly. "So you want us to defend them because that witch in training said they didn't do it?" argued Blondie. "I don't know, Ash," sighed Briar. "I think we should go get cleaned up before our next class," said Darling. Fed up with everything that had happened that day, Apple yelling at Holly, Duchess, and her meeting with Hunter, she wasn't about to let Grimm and the rest of her friends prevent good people from coming to a great school. "No," the princess yelled. They didn't do this, and if any of you were being accused of something, the whole kingdom would be up in arms, and because they don't have a throne, you won't help them? We are future rulers. It's our destiny to help and lead regular people like them. Also fed up with the events of that day, Daring stepped up to his sister. They're not just regular people. I don't know if you've noticed, but that was the Evil Queen's daughter, Ashlyn. Her mother's mistakes aren't her own. Just like our father's charm isn't yours, she argued, looking at her brother in disappointment. The prince left without saying another word. Thinking she had stepped too far, Ashlyn hung her head as she walked back to her locker, but before she could reach the door, a hand grabbed her shoulder. You're right, Ashlyn. We haven't been acting like royals, Briar said, looking back at Apple. I don't know who started it, but if you need my help, I'm here. So am I, added Apple, grabbing Ashlyn and Briar's hands. And us, added Dexter and Darling. Well, okay then, let's hurry, Apple said with a smile that seemed to brighten the whole room. And with this, the group of royals, now in arms, headed to the west corridor of the 4th building where the headmaster's office was. Apple walked straight past the secretary's desk and into Grimm's office, speaking before he had a chance to cut her off. Headmaster Grimm, it wasn't their fault, and we are just as much to blame as they are, announced Apple. Maybe not just as much, added Dexter. Is that so, Miss White? Grimm said with a glare, because if not, they would have to leave, and our school could go back to its peaceful ways. What? Yelled Raven. Yes, we're sure. You can't expel them, said Ashlyn. And you can't expel us all, smirked Darling. Grimm glared at the students, knowing the princess was right, then turned back to the scared-looking group of rebels. You all have class, and better not be late, he said through his teeth, then before anyone had a chance to move, Go! His voice bellowed, shaking the room. The students all rushed out of the room and down the corridor to the main building before he could say anything else. Out of breath, the students stopped to rest before heading to their next class. 3-letter word for chaos, Maddie said, panting. Okay, if we're going to hang out, I'm going to need a Wonderland dictionary, laughed Briar. Cat, Raven and Ashlyn said at the same time. Thanks, Apple, continued Raven. Yeah, we owe you, agreed Sparrow. Actually, started Apple. Yeah, Apple, you were amazing, interrupted Ashlyn. The princesses nodded and smiled at each other. We better get to class before Grimm sees us, Dexter said, still out of breath. We should meet after school to hang out, said Briar. Really? asked Cedar. Really, we made opinions about you before we even met you, Briar said. We shouldn't have been so cold because of who your parents are, added Darling. Hearing this made Ashlyn light up with joy. Maybe, she thought, smiling to herself. We'd love to, said Cerise. Awesome, can't wait, Apple said with another huge smile. The group separated off into different directions, with each of them feeling strangely. Like something big had just happened, or things were changing, not just in Ever After, but in all the kingdoms. Maybe. The rest of the school day was abnormally quiet. All the students had known of the drama that had taken place that day, thanks to Blondie's newscast, and no one dared to step out of line in fear of Headmaster Grimm, who hadn't left his office since lunch. However, Princess Briar Beauty, party girl of Ever After, was about to break Grimm's #1 rule, no parties. Cupid, Briar yelled. Hi, Briar, it's been a while, Cupid replied, turning around to greet Briar. C.A. Cupid had ocean blue eyes that pulled you in and strawberry pink hair. Other than her eyes, everything else on her was some shade of pink. Her dress, her shoes, her makeup, everything besides a few pieces of golden jewelry she wore. She carried herself well and was incredibly well-mannered, which was expected since she was technically a god. Cupid, I had a hexcellent idea, Briar said, pulling her away from the walkway and into the first corridor of the hedge maids next to the gardens. I was thinking, she continued, this year the first week of school is followed by True Hearts Day, and well, we can't come back to school without a page-turning party. So you want to throw a True Hearts Day back-to-school party this weekend, said Cupid. Exactly, and you can't celebrate True Hearts Day without the daughter of Eros. So will you help me? Briar said, putting her hands together. Grimm hates parties almost as much as he hates True Hearts Day, Cupid said. No, he hates True Hearts Day much more, laughed Briar. The two girls laughed, and Cupid looked up, and paused before turning back to Briar. Okay, she agreed. Yes, yelled Briar. But Grimm can't find out, Cupid said, quieting Briar. Of course, she insisted. While the demigod and princess planned for their party, deep in the enchanted forest by Crystal Lake, Hunter and Ashlyn sat close together, enjoying the cool summer evening. Hunter braided together a flower crown, while Ashlyn lovingly pet a small deer. "Here," Hunter said, placing the crown on Ashlyn's head, over top of the pink glass tiara that was already there. Ashlyn looked up at the string of pearl-white flowers. "Hunter," she said lovingly. The two embraced before kissing, but let go of each other when they heard the shudder of a camera. "Gotcha," honked Duchess.